What is up, everybody? Back here today with another video, and this time I got something a bit special for you. Just got back from kayaking. It's a nice Labor Day here, September 6th, and I'm gonna switch it up a bit. I got another couple videos on After Virtue coming soon. I've been a little caught up with schoolwork, but right now I've had some demand for more stuff, more content on the early church fathers, so that's what we're doing today. I'm gonna be taking you through a brief walkthrough of Justin Martyr's second apology. So let's get right into that. Again, notes are going to be linked in the video description below. If you like the content, please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you want me to do. I take suggestions, and I will keep it in mind. So, the second apology. This is going to be a shorter text. You can find it online, and it's going to be addressed to the Roman Senate. And the main goal here is that Justin wants to address these false accusations and these bogus charges against Christians in his time period. So really, you can go out, find this online, find it on New Advent, and you can see for yourself what it's all about. It's only a couple pages long. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So chapter 1 is just a brief intro. You can go and read that, but I'll skip over it for now. Chapter 2 is quite interesting. So here he's going to be talking about some charges against the Christians, and let's kind of dig into this. So the point here is that he's going to be retelling this story of this persecution, and in the beginning he's going to reference what is called the natural law, which is actually quite interesting because Paul references that as well. And you can start to see the genesis of these historical ideas that are going to lead up to people like Thomas Aquinas. So you get the natural law starting to develop with Paul, you get Justin Martyr referencing it, you get people like Thomas Aquinas really building that up. So that's just something to keep in mind. And again, I say in my notes here that I don't think it's insignificant, as this reference to the natural law shows that the dominant paradigm in the ancient world was this acknowledgement of the natural law and values embedded in nature. So again, the rest of chapter 2 here is going to recount some accusations made against Christians simply for being Christians. And Justin's going to tell this story about a woman and her husband. And a lot of times in the church fathers, you're going to get these really great psychological insights. I think this story is one of them. We see an insight here into, I think, a Roman citizen, the man, and his wife, and both of them were very immoral people. The wife converts to Christianity and tries to get her husband to do so. He won't. He becomes way worse, and then he goes out and he continues to do these horrible acts. She ends up divorcing him, and what does he do? He takes the violence out on the theological teachers in the area. So again, you can go and read this for your own, but I think that there is some great psychological insights in these stories, such as this one. So we can think about some questions like, what is the nature of jealousy in a relationship? Why exactly would the man take his wrath out upon the theological teachers? What was the animus going on here? And so I'll let you think about that on your own, because I don't want to spend too much time. I want to get into the more philosophical parts of this text. But I think that even in these stories, you really have to sit back and think about why Justin's recounting this story. I think that he's recounting this story to provide an example of these bogus charges against Christians, but we can also co-opt this story to get a glimpse into the psychological insights of the Romans and the Christians at the time of this writing. So he also has something interesting in chapter 2 here, when he says that there are only 2 reasons for denying someone's belief, for somebody to deny their own beliefs. 1, he or she condemns the thing itself. And 2, he or she avoids confession because he is sufficiently alien to the thing. This is interesting. So in the context of this letter here, this apology to the Roman Senate, Justin really is meaning that for the Christian, if he truly believes his doctrines to be the case, if he truly believes that Christianity is the true philosophy, as he will go on to say, then he will not shrink from it. And we can think about this today in our own context. Are we going to recant our beliefs And if so, why? Is it because we don't? Is it because we really do deny them, or is it because, as he says, we are sufficiently alien to the thing? And that's an interesting way to put it. I think that he means there that we are not sufficiently grounded in the truth of it. We don't sufficiently believe it to be the case. Again, Justin Martyr, his name is Justin Martyr for a reason. He's going to go on to be martyred because of his philosophical beliefs in Christianity. And so he certainly believes that Christianity is the true philosophy. So let's move on to chapter 3 here, because it's quite brief. So here he's going to accuse this guy Crescens of ignorance of the Christian doctrine. And he makes a few striking remarks about philosophy. He says that the difference between the philosopher and the opinionated man is that the former, meaning the philosopher, will dare to speak out when truth is confronted with falsehood. Yet somebody who keeps quiet is going to be the opinionated man. So again, we get this really Socratic, this really Platonic theme penetrating through all of Justin's works. And of course, if you read the dialogue with Trypho, you will see that Justin was a Platonist. He studied Platonic philosophy. He was highly educated. He studied under Aristotelians, but he ended up falling in love with the Platonic tradition. And so we have this real big emphasis on truth being the hallmark of philosophy. So that is going to be something that you're going to have to keep in mind when you're reading his works. So chapter 4 has a lot of argumentation, a lot of dense argumentation in it. And I'm going to go through a couple of them and leave the rest to you for the sake of time. But here, Justin's really answering the question of why Christians shouldn't kill themselves to be with the Heavenly Father. And this is actually a debate going on in the Roman Senate at the time. We have these charges against the Christians. These Romans are saying, well, why don't you, if you value the afterlife so much, why don't you just kill yourself now? And Justin has to address this. He has to correct the errors and the misunderstandings of those who are not sufficiently taught in the theological disciplines. And so he's going to give a few arguments here. And this is actually something that's worth talking about today, because I've met a few people who have had similar thoughts. They're like, what is my point as a Christian? If there's so much emphasis on the next life, then what is my point in the here and now? And Justin's going to give some very succinct answers to this. So you can rephrase that question as really here in my notes. Why should I not just die right now to gain eternal glory? Again, this is a real life question. It's not just a question that people were asking back thousands of years ago, but I have heard people ask it today. So here's the first argument that we can kind of reconstruct from Justin's work. So premise 1, God made the world for the sake of humans. Premise 2, killing ourselves is to leave the world. Premise 3, leaving the world by choice is to forsake the good of God's created order. Premise 4, forsaking such a good is displeasing to God. Premise 5, we should try to please God as Christians. Conclusion, it follows, therefore, we should not kill ourselves. So Justin's going to give this argument in a little bit more condensed form to the Roman Senate. And that's going to be one of his answers. Again, I think there's 3 more here. You can take a look at my notes. And so let's just take a peek at one more for you. So premise 1, as Christians, we have a duty to instruct others in the faith and take glory in the created order. I just went kayaking today, and I was out on this beautiful ocean, in the Gulf of Mexico. I went through all these little inlets and stuff. I had a great time. And we can really take this insight and think about Genesis, the book of Genesis, when it says that God created the world and it was good. Creation in the Christian tradition is good. Okay, evil is a privation. We can talk about that another time. But the created order, the body, all of these things, nature, all of this around me, it's good. And so to forsake that by leaving this world out of sheer choice, sheer whatever the reason may be, you're going to be forsaking part of the good. And again, we can throw in a lot of stuff here about God being the good and the created order being a participation in the good. So by the transitive property, we're therefore forsaking God. And I think this is all operating in the background of this dialogue, and it's certainly operating in the background of the Thomistic period, starting with Aquinas and going up even till now with the Neo-Thomists. But let me rephrase this argument here. So as Christians, we have a duty to instruct others in the faith and take glory in the created order. Killing ourselves prevents us from doing this. We have to abide by our duties as Christians, therefore we should not kill ourselves. Again, Justin's going to give this argument in a condensed form here in chapter 4. And so you can start to see that Justin, in the background of this work, has a great, great reverence for not only God, but for the created world, and his duty as a Christian to instruct others in the faith, and to enjoy the created order, and to bring glory to God in his philosophical reasoning, in his teaching, in all that he does. And so what I want you to do is I want you to, when you're reading this dialogue, think about that, and think about how Justin, put yourself in his shoes. Think about this. He's about to be martyred. His friends are about to be martyred. And he's sitting here writing, and he's still taking unbelievable amount of glory in the created world. And he's having this supreme reverence for God, for the creation. And he's telling people, don't give up hope, but stick to your duties as Christians, and especially as philosophers. Chapter 5. This is a little bit, I'm going to kind of skim over this one. You can go back and read it. It's interesting. So there's this idea in the ancient world that demons are in fact, and Justin's going to have a slightly different view, but there's a common view that demons, so the demonic mentioned in the biblical text and in this whole tradition, those are going to be the Zeus, the Apollo, etc. The polytheistic gods are seen as demons. Justin's going to give a little bit of a different example here. He's going to say that the children of fallen angels and human women are demons. And again, we can start to see here is theological speculation. Again, I'm going to leave this one up to you. I don't want to get too into the weeds on this because it'll take us into his other works and other theological speculation. So let's move here to chapter 6. And this is a very crucial chapter. So in chapter 6, Justin's going to point out that God is just the name we apply to this ultimate source of reality, this foundation of reality that we do not yet understand fully. This is something I see a lot of people even today get mixed up. They don't seem to quite grasp that God is simply the name we apply to the most fundamental, the most ultimate. They think that God is just this sky daddy. Okay, again, going back in the Christian tradition here, we see that, according to Justin, he says that God is just an opinion. This is a direct quote from him. An opinion implanted into the nature of men of a thing that can hardly be explained. That the word God is just our label for this ultimate source of reality. Again, for Aquinas, it's going to be the first cause, the pure act. For Justin here, it's going to be something a little bit quite similar, but he doesn't have that robust philosophical conception going on yet. But the titles that we give God, according to Justin here in chapter 6, are derived from his works and his functions. So Father, Lord, Creator. We can see how those titles are not, they're simply titles given to God by us to describe his works and his functions. And again, Justin's going to go on here and say the same of the word Christ and of the word Jesus. So Christ actually is derived from the Greek word Christos, meaning the anointed one. And so we apply the label Christ to mean the anointed one, the heavenly king, the Son of God. And the name Jesus has significance for Justin because it is used to drive out these demonic forces in the world. And we see this constantly in the New Testament. It's a very important theme in the New Testament. So with that in mind, let's take a look here at chapter 7 here. So chapter 7 is actually quite interesting. And the title of it is The World Preserved for the Sake of Christians, Man's Responsibility. So there's a lot going on. It's a bit of a bigger chapter here. But he says, wherefore, he starts out by saying, wherefore God delays, causing the confusion and the destruction of the whole world, by which the wicked angels and demons and men shall cease to exist, because the seed of Christians who know that they are the cause of preservation in nature. That's an interesting phrase here. So there's a lot going on, and I'm not a Justin Martyr scholar. This is one of the first time I've looked at his works. But my interpretation right off the bat is that, again, thinking about the rest of the context of what we've talked about, humans have a duty, have a responsibility to not only take glory and reverence in the created order, but here he says, preserve it. And this is quite interesting. And he brings up this reference of demons and evil spirits in the next sentence here. And so I actually want you to go and read this passage. And my interpretation right off the bat, my primary interpretation, is going to be that humans have a duty to be, as Heidegger says, spokespersons of being. Our consciousness it brings alive the created order. Not only are we here to build, reproduce, and so on, but we're here to preserve it. We're here to take glory in the created order. And according to Justin, we're here to drive out the demonic powers of the world. Satan is often referred to in the New Testament as the prince of the power of the air, the king of this world. And so for Justin, I think operating in the background here is going to be this thought that one of our duties as Christians is to really preserve the good of the created order and not let Satan take it over. And so we can start to see really with this passage a radical worldview Justin has. It's so contrary to our modern assumptions. So when you're reading this, try to put yourself in his position. So he's going to go on here to reference a lot of other philosophers, including the Stoics. So in case you didn't know, Justin was a highly learned man. He studied under Stoics, he studied under the Platonists, he studied under some Aristotelians. Ultimately, again, as I said, he settled on Platonism. But he's going to talk here about the Stoics a little bit and how they differ from the Christians. And then he's going to talk about here virtue and vice, again, mentioning the Stoics. And he's going to say here, the Stoics, not observing this, maintained that all things take place according to the necessity of fate. So this is a big point in early Christian philosophy. You find this in Origen, this emphasis on Christians having free will, the freedom to choose. And again, in this passage, Justin's going to tie it into the development of virtue and vice. And so the Stoics, by contrast, had a very strong doctrine of necessity going on, whereas the Christians are going to have this very strong doctrine of the freedom of the will, the freedom to pursue the virtues, the freedom to pursue the vices. And he says here again, but God, since in the beginning made the race of angels and men with free will, they will justly suffer in eternal fire the punishment of whatever sins they have committed. And this is the nature of all that is made, to be capable of vice and virtue. For neither would any of them be praiseworthy unless there were the power to turn to both virtue and vice. And so here we get this idea of virtue and vice being the result of our freedom of choice. We have no predetermination here. We have an utter responsibility for your choices, and we see here that the genesis of the idea that we will suffer consequences of the virtues and the vices that we choose to pursue. And then he's going to go on a little bit more to talk about the Stoics. And he's going to finish up by saying, and to have looked on God himself as emerging both in part and in whole in every wickedness, or that neither vice nor virtue is anything which is contrary to every sound idea, reason, and sense. So that's quite interesting to think about. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at chapter 8, and then we'll stop there, and that'll be about halfway through the dialogue. But again, chapter 7 was pretty long, so go back and read it. I just touched on a little bit of the content in it. That's the longest chapter in this first half of the text. So here, let's move on to chapter 8 and take a quick look before stopping the video and then picking up with part 2. So here he's going to state that the Logos has been implanted in all men. And this is really a key idea in early Christian philosophy. The Logos, which is in John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, or the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. So again, for the early Christians, Jesus is the Logos. He is reason. He is the Word. And that's going to be taken from the book of John. For Justin, the Logos is going to be implanted in all men. And famously, Justin holds that even the virtuous pagans, like Aristotle and Plato and some of the pre-Socratics, are going to go to heaven because they pursued the Logos with all their heart, all their mind, and all their soul. And in doing so, they actually were pursuing Jesus before he came to earth. So this is going to be part of what he's talking about when he brings that up in another place. I think that's either in his first apology or in his dialogue with Trypho. So he's going to say here that he's going to reference the Stoic school and say that the Logos is implanted in every race of men. And then he references Heraclitus, surprisingly. And he's going to go on to say that those who pursue the Logos to the fullest extent, so think about Heraclitus, think about the Stoics, Seneca, think about Socrates, even think about Aristotle. They are going to be persecuted. Aristotle left Athens because he was afraid of what was going to happen to him. Famously, Socrates was executed. Seneca was executed by Emperor Nero. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's who it was. But he was executed. I may have gotten the name mixed up. And same with Heraclitus. And so Justin's going to say that for those who pursue the Logos, reason, truth, in essentially Christ himself, those people are going to be hated because of, again, the demonic powers in this Christian world for Justin. And that's something to dwell on even in this day and age, whether or not you buy into the whole Christian schema. If you are pursuing truth to its fullest extent, you aren't going to be liked by many people. Oftentimes people want to hear comforting falsehoods, and oftentimes they don't want to hear the truth at all. But if you're a philosopher in this classical tradition, that is your job, is to pursue the truth. And so you're not going to make many friends. You're going to make a lot of enemies. And Justin here is pointing this out thousands of years ago. I think this was written almost 2,000 years ago. So that's something worth dwelling on. And I have here in my notes that it is no coincidence that philosophers achieve so little worldly success, and especially philosophers operating in this Christian tradition, and that they live in such isolation. For Justin, it's going to be that the world it often doesn't want to hear you. It doesn't want to hear the truth. He's writing this to the Roman Senate, and the world doesn't want to hear it. They want to remain ignorant. And again, he's going to point out later in the dialogue that the accusations against the Christians are, one, bogus, but two, they are the same things that the Romans themselves are doing and not being persecuted. So there's this hypocrisy at play. And Justin is subtly pointing out that this hypocrisy is because he and his followers in this perennial tradition are pursuing truth, and the world does not want to hear it. So what I want you to do here as I close up is just to think about how radical Justin's view is, and think about what he's doing. He is essentially taking up arms with only his pen and his ideas against the entire Roman Empire. And he's doing that from the point of a Christian Platonist philosopher. We've touched on a few ideas here, and in the second half of the dialogue, we're going to be getting more into some crucial philosophical points. Most of his philosophy is going to be contained in his dialogue with Trypho. This is more of a defense of the faith on a pragmatic level. But I hope you enjoyed that, and hopefully you can take some ideas from this. If you want me to answer anything or go into more detail, leave it in the comments below. I will get back to you. And with that, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks.